Ashley Frawley, welcome to Rebalance. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're talking on Friday, the 14th of July, the morning your time, where things have settled a bit, I think. I mean, I just looked at the front page of the Times and there's other news on the front page, God forbid. Look, I know we all love celebrity news, but I mean, this story just went mad, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it has a little bit of everything. It's a high-profile figure. There was some anonymity, so it invited people to question. So if you look at the sort of academic literature on how something, gets onto the public agenda, or on the internet, how something goes viral, participation is key. If it feels that if you can connect with people individually, headlines with you in the title, and on the internet, things that invite people to participate. And so everyone was sort of, asking, who is it? Am I the only one who doesn't know who it is? And so that element of mystery almost made it worse for the individual involved, because it invited an enormous amount of speculation and added quite a lot of interest to the story as more and more, presenters weighed in and said, no, it wasn't them. And it was this sort of terrible game of guess who.
And then I would say on top of that, did it become even bigger because it involved the BBC, an institution which everyone loves to complain about, but they still wouldn't be without, and The Sun, an institution which polarizes and divides like few other media outlets, certainly in the UK.
Yeah, so there was a mix of that. There was this, on the one hand, this demand that the BBC has presenters that are sort of paragons of virtue, so it's supposed to be this virtuous institution that represents, the good underlying values of our good, the best that is our society. And so part of it was this kind of morality play of this individual. On the one hand, obviously, there was a question initially about whether or not something illegal had happened. So there was that. But even as it became clearer and clearer that that was not the case, it was more about this, about condemnation and the need to kind of set an example, which I found to be really distasteful and quite silly, because I'm quite sure that most people can tell that giving money to a crack-addicted young person is not a good idea. And we don't really need someone to be sort of trotted out and tied to a tree and publicly flagellated, lest we silly medieval peasants get the wrong idea. But then on the other hand, the Sun, is also a somewhere that, to which a lot of ire gets directed, that they're symbolic of all the worst things in British society. And so there was this kind of a side to it, the response to the story, that was a bit sneering as well, and this desire to kind of condemn the Sun for past instances of transgressions that they had made, and this like double standards, that they were not holding themselves to the same kinds of standards that they were holding this presenter to. But I think part of that was wrong too, because it was sort of saying like, oh well, they shouldn't be reporting on this. But it was in the public interest. I'm saying that I'm not saying that people shouldn't have reported on it. It was, it was an interesting story, and it was a scandal and so on. The thing
you say public interest. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you really quickly. You say, I reckon there's this difference between public interest and, hang on, how do I phrase it? Is it in the public interest, or is the public just interested? Do you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't matter. If the public is interested, then it gets reported. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or even if there is a perception that the public would be interested, because obviously it's not like people democratically decide what goes into the newspapers. It's an editorial process that's involved. But I mean, if the editors judge that it's, probably going to be something that will get people's attention, then they will report it, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is, what I didn't like was the sort of morality play around it that was a bit silly, right? So it became like, oh well, they shouldn't report this, and it became sort of a little bit about press freedom and all of this sort of thing, about whether or not the person's name should, what details should have been published. I think that's, that's fair enough. This idea that that it became a question of press freedom, but for me, I just thought it was so silly to pretend like the reason people were interested in this was because of the morals involved and the vulnerable individual and so on. No, it was gossip. And we really
Okay.
like gossip.
So this is the thing, and the phrase you used before was about TV people being held up as some sort of paragon of virtue. And look, this is something which I have experienced, and I freely say, in the end, we or the public, they love a takedown, don't they? They love to see someone's fall from grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I did a segment on Times Radio Breakfast where the other guest that was on with me said, "Oh, this other presenter came on and denounced him, and I bet you he's looking for that guy's job. He senses that a space might be opening up." And I really do think that is a part of it. You see this a lot with, I know this isn't cancel culture, but you see this with cancel culture as a kind of related issue where there's these sort of public pylons, and a lot of the pylons are in areas where you have like an overproduction of people.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people are clamoring for those positions and they're like, that should be me. It shouldn't be you. Look at you. You don't deserve it. Right. And so we love to see the mighty fall, definitely. But let
me tell you, TV's a nasty business sometimes. Let me tell you.
Yeah. And this happens in comedy as well. I've seen this, I interviewed on my own podcast, Based AF. It's such a silly name for a podcast, but I didn't come up with it. The fans did. No,
of course.
On my podcast, I interviewed Simon Evans, who's a TV presenter and comedian, and he's talked about how comedy is such a competitive atmosphere that sort of there's almost this competitive denunciation that goes on where it's like, if we could just get this person out of the way, then there'd be a space for me, and this is kind of what people are doing. And I've seen this even in academia. I'm an associate professor of, I'm what Americans would call tenured. And these are very difficult positions to come by. And, and if I kind of have some opinion online, people will denounce me like, oh, this is an associate professor. Yes. Surprise, surprise. I can have opinions and I'm not going to follow a line because we have academic freedom. And that's actually a really important part of society, that the university doesn't have a line that we're all supposed to follow. But I've actually been criticized even by colleagues that we, as a university, we should take a line or something like that, which is just absolutely contra everything in a free society. But these are coveted kinds of positions, right? And I remember when I was a PhD student, young snotty-nosed kid, and I remember I went to Noam Chomsky. I went to see him speak. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Chomsky says, but, having matured a bit, I recognize that he's contributed quite a lot.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with listening to all opinions.
And I remember that everyone gave him a standing ovation and I didn't. Like, what a dumb, what a stupid thing. But, it was like, I'm going to be better than that. I would have been better than that. No, I would not have been. But this is the kind of thing where I knew that it was going to be really difficult to get to that kind of position. I think there was this sort of latent jealousy. Yeah. And I think underneath a lot of our desire to see the mighty fall is this latent jealousy. I should be there. I would be there if not for you. I think this kind of, not conscious, but deep down below is like, my life sucks. And it would make it just a little bit better to see that your life was just so great, suck just a little more.
So you said before I know this isn't cancel culture, isn't it? I mean, what you've just described kind of sounds like that. And now with the further stuff coming out, again, type of allegations that I'm very familiar with, inappropriate behavior, putting a kiss at the end of a message and calling that an abuse of power. I mean, it just feels like it's taking on a sort of life of its own and going, dare I say, a bit too far.
Yeah, I suppose I said it's not exactly cancel culture because when the story first broke, it appeared as though something illegal had happened.
Right. Okay.
So there was a lack of clarity there. And it wasn't quite clear kind of exactly what had happened or if it was still going on or was it, is this person a teenager literally at this moment, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of lack of clarity around that. But I think, yes, it has now sort of evolved into this kind of situation of a bit of a free-for-all where, you're invited to sort of go back and reinterpret your experiences with this person through an entirely new light, which is very scary, I think. I made the argument in that the other day on Times Radio that, you need to be free to be a jerk. Like, I would hope that people are not jerks, but you do need to have that freedom in society. I think you create a much worse society in which, you expect utter virtue from everyone, which is not possible. Like nobody is 100% good. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody slips up. Everybody misjudges a social situation and says the wrong thing and so on. And I don't really want to live in a world in which we risk being publicly denounced, particularly for young people, like coming up online. There's no forgiveness. One mistake and you ruin your life. What kind of world are we really creating here? We think we're doing it all, or we tell ourselves we're doing it for accountability. We're not doing it for accountability. This is carnival. That's what this is. It's watching the high pretend that they're low and the low pretend that they're high, and we all get to pretend we have power for a day, and that's it.
Let's get back to, I guess, the more acute situation. Well, look, we still don't know the full story, and no one, I believe, can make any full judgment until we do. Part of the outrage, and we talked about this before when you talked about, loving to watch a celebrity fall, is this idea of, well, the BBC's taxpayer funded. This is what, quote unquote, our money is being spent on, and isn't it outrageous? Doesn't that mean that anyone who gets paid by the government or by taxpayer money is fair game now? I mean, politicians, sure, but civil servants, anyone who gets and we're talking about the people who aren't the public-facing ones, who are the, I shouldn't say this, but faceless people behind the scenes. They're getting paid by the government. We wouldn't care if we heard about their misdeeds. It just doesn't seem right.
I think part of it is this tendency to turn these public institutions into like hallowed institutions. So we saw this with the whole vaccine mandate scandal in the UK, where there were discussions of firing tens of thousands of nurses. During when you have a shortage of medical staff, the government had like 2 years to sort the situation out, and they clearly didn't want to, because they actually reduced the number of beds, and this is a long-term trend going across a lot of different countries. They weren't about to reverse that trend anytime soon. There's sort of this just-in-time production in healthcare. Then we're going to reverse that. But even the idea that during a public health crisis, you would fire a ton of workers for not getting a vaccine that at that time they knew was not a sterilizing vaccine, that it might lower for a certain period of time, it might lower how much you pass things on, but it wasn't like a vaccine like the measles vaccine or something like that. Anyways, but I made the point at the time that it was about saying these people don't fit the values of our hallowed NHS, and how dare they be paid by it. I think that's what it was
about.
So
let's make an example of them.
Let's make an example of them, that they do not suit our values, and like calling them anti-vaxxers and all this sort of thing, when just because you might refuse this particular vaccine, whatever, I think vaccines are the greatest thing that humans have come up with. They're the reason why like we live so long, and we've done away with at least in developed countries, a good portion of child and infant mortality. They're great. But the idea that you would have questions about a new vaccine, a technology that people weren't really sure about. Okay, I thought the vaccine was great, but I understand why people had questions. But to call these people anti-vaxxers, to lump them in with moms who were not vaccinating their kids for measles and using essential oils and all of that stuff, that kind of stereotype of the anti-vaxxer was quite ludicrous. But it really showed that it was about the underlying values, that these people are sort of persona non grata.
Right. So they had to be shown up. What's the phrase? Being, not just doing the right thing, but being seen to be doing the right thing.
Yeah, they had to be made an example of.
Okay, final thought then. And gosh, I could probably sit and talk to you about vaccines for another half hour or so. But look, lessons in all of this. For anyone watching, be they male, female, public-facing, taxpayer-paid, private, whatever. Basically, anyone who has a job and goes into an office. Is this a lesson in being way more careful and being really judicious about everything you do, and about basically saying work is for work. Work is where I do my job, and I go home, and that means losing the social aspect of it, losing the bonding aspects of it, which come from working in a team or working in an office, um, because you don't want there to be any room for any misrepresentation or, I mean, we're now seeing this phrase abuse of power used, or a perceived abuse of power. Is this a lesson out of all of this?
Well, the thing about abuse of power, like if you are a successful person, and you're famous, you're on TV, or even you're just a successful person, that's
Hmm.
part of who you are. It's not really inseparable. It's not really separable from your personality. So to say like, oh, it's an abuse of power to like get sexual partners, like, okay, well, for all celebrities who marry other celebrities are abusing their power, or
Hmm.
and people actually make this argument too around like, or who all celebrities who marry anybody are abusing their power, because what is their cachet? It's because they're
Is there
famous.
fame?
That's just it. It is not
Hmm.
like it is. You cannot separate these things. Can we please have a little bit of perspective here?
Hmm.
That people are adults and are capable of making judgments. Okay, we are capable of making judgments about, like, I am impressed by this person. Yes, I recognize that part of the reason I am attracted to this person is that I am impressed by their success. They have money. They can help me get the things that I want. Okay, if I'm like, I've never dated a rich person, but I can quite imagine that would be part of the appeal. Let's be real. Okay, let's not all, we're all pretending. We play this game where we pretend the people who are famous are like our parents, and we pretend that we're children, and we demand they be role models for us. That
Hmm.
is such nonsense. That is it is not a real thing that anybody actually believes. It's just that we like there's a certain amount of jealousy there. Like we like to sort of see get a hit on somebody who seems untouchable.
Hmm.
We are powerless. We like to feel powerful for a day, right? This cancel culture, I wrote an article about this in Sublation magazine, the carnival of cancel culture. Cancel culture is a carnival. It's, the carnivals erupt enormously in countries where there's a huge drift between the very high and the very low. You
Mhm.
have a lot of social inequality. You have bigger carnivals. Why? Because it underpins it cleanses that social order for a day where you get to pretend you're the one who's holding the power and they are accountable to you. They are
Hmm.
not. They are not. It allows you to feel powerful for a day, but the next day you got to go back to your crap job. They have the money and you don't, and that's not going to change that. It allows you to feel like you're being accountable. It allows you to pretend like there's a moral underpinning to society that holds the whole thing together. But that is not the case. We still live in an unequal society. You are still powerless, and it's not going to help to cancel people.
Ashley, it's been great talking to you. Really, really interesting. I think so much of this goes beyond the headlines of what we've seen and what we know, and frankly, what we don't know. And I think what we don't know is been crucial in all of this. Just a quick final thought. This is going to run for a bit, isn't it? I mean, the moment is going to be when Hugh Edwards finally speaks, because people are saying, "Oh, his wife issued a statement, but there was no denial." I mean, this is just the circus is going to fire up again, isn't it?
I suppose so, but never underestimate the fickleness of the media. When a story is old, it's old. That's it. That people always ask me about this. I've been commenting on the news for I don't know how long, like 10 years. I've been a commentator, and people are
Yeah.
like, "Well, this is going to be a big deal. It's going to mark." I'm like, "No, you're going to forget about this by next week. Mark my words." But as long as you're right though. If there's some kind of like novelty to the story, like he speaks or something like that, yeah, it'll come
Hmm.
in. But I don't think it's going to make the headlines for too much longer.
Okay, we'll see. Do you think there's some sympathy out there for him? I mean, I've heard sympathy from colleagues, past and present colleagues of his, and it's been interesting because usually, and look, definitely in my own experience, people distance themselves from you pretty damn quickly, and that doesn't seem to be happening. I'm wondering what your view is of the sort of public sympathy for Hugh Edwards.
I haven't seen a great deal.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily think he needs any sympathy. I
Hmm.
mean, I just don't think that he needs to be made an example of. I think part of what annoyed me was this idea that it took too long like, oh, he was allowed to work for, 6-7 weeks before anything
Mm.
happened. It's like, well, every time somebody makes an allegation, you want to like fire them or suspend them or something like that.
Well, he wasn't told, was he? And from what
Yeah.
I've read, the Director General of the BBC wasn't told either. So,
Yeah, but you have to think, like, when you're in the public eye, probably tons and tons of stuff comes in all the time, and you can't be bringing, like, I think you would seriously have issues going on air if you were always told everything that was
every
coming
little
in.
complaint that comes
Yeah, I mean,
through,
like,
sure.
look at social media, man. Like, if you read the comments, you're gonna lose
try
your
not
mind.
to be honest.
Yeah,
But yeah.
you can't do that. But there was the same thing happened with Caroline Flack. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
Oh,
whole
yes, of course.
story.
Yeah, the
I wrote about that
ITV
too.
presenter. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, as soon as there were allegations, there was a hashtag that was "sack the Flack," that she should be made an example of. And you would do it if it was a man, right? So everybody knew, like, nobody was like, oh no, Caroline Flack hit her partner. What are my hands doing? Oh my God, I'm beating someone. Like, obviously you're capable of controlling yourself, right? Everybody knew that this was not something that was a real thing, that if you saw someone on television, you would feel compelled to like engage in domestic violence. But it was to make an example of her, to score one against women who they felt didn't get enough cancellations. Let's equal this out. Let's share out the pain. This is the kind of society we live in. We want an equality of pain.
And look what happened to her. She took her own life.
It absolutely destroyed her. And before the trial wasn't even started yet, and she lost all of her gigs. And she felt like that was the end for her. And she'd always suffered with mental health issues, and her work had been something that had helped her. Well, that was all gone. But it was the same kind of thing, right? Like, she needed to be made an example of, and the corporations, they all followed that, right? Because they only care about their bottom line and their reputation. Everybody's pretending they really believe in these values, and no one does.
Ashley, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
Read, watch and listen online at the Balanced website.